Welcome to Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase. Brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com. Alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. And now, here's your host, Rob Chase.
Today is our Village Elders program. Our Village Elders today are Steve Corker, former Spokane City Councilman and teacher, Dave Wallace, former civil rights activist and prayer warrior, and Nat Williams, entrepreneur and inventor. Today our subject is what made America great and can America become great again?
Well, hello. I'm Steve Corker, and I'm sitting here today with Nat Williams and David Wallace. Nat Williams, I apologize. And we just spent about a half an hour upstairs talking about, what made this country great.
Right.
And some of the values, things in the history, some of the issues that we wanted to kind of raise consciousness in about things that we might do to make this country great again. Because I personally believe it's going to take more than just President Trump. It's going to take the institutions that made this country great.
Right.
I'm talking about families, I'm talking about church, I'm talking about Boy Scouts, I'm talking about my teachers, I'm talking about that village that created opportunity. And we thought we'd kind of share some thoughts as they relate to history, government, things that we'd like people to think about in order to really fulfill that mission of kind of returning the greatness that many of us think we're either losing or forgetting about in our country today.
We never knew.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we just wanted to sit down and talk about some of those things that, and we were talking about how unique America was in creating that greatness. That
yes,
we were isolated for the first 150 years of our country. We didn't have to worry about foreign threat. We had an agrarian society that patiently dealt with issues of slavery, of sexism, women voting, and we were allowed to develop these wonderful institutions. We had the time to do it, and we had the resources, we had the space. Well, today those resources are limited. The space is getting more confined. We have to face globalism that has kind of detracted us from our national mission. And so I guess it's kind of a primer to this discussion. Let's start off. So,
we also had time to develop skills, whether the kids were working on the farm. I didn't live on a farm, but my father was a funeral director, and I was working in the funeral home, dusting the caskets and running the vacuum cleaner and things like that, and eventually mowing the lawn, which was not one of my favorite topics.
We talked about the work ethic.
Yeah, right.
Yes. We were talking about the Second World War and how unique it was, the greatest generation, that these men of 18, 19, and 20 did the things they did. And one of the things was the Depression that forced a lot of young men and women to start working at an early age. They were more mature. They had developed more independence, more self-confidence. Not that you have to have poverty or depressions to create character, but
we were the children of those people.
Yes.
And as such, we learned from them. I worked in the skill trades. I built fences with my father and repaired cars with my stepdad from a very early age. And there was nobody there talking about whether or not, OSHA would determine the sandpaper grit was correct or there was enough circulation in the air. We just did the work. And we did it because it was family.
Well, you had extended family.
Yeah.
I mean, I was raised by so many women, my grandparents and aunts, who lived and shared life with me. I couldn't get an Oedipus complex. There were too many women in my life. But our relatives lived near each other.
Yeah.
I had a daughter in Pennsylvania. I had a son in out of state. And there was a reinforcement of family that is different than the independence that we have today, that young people just can't literally, they can call up or text, but that personal contact, that intimacy of family has been distracted by geography and by the way we've changed work, technology.
Well, the Depression was disruptive to my family, and my father lost what he had in Iowa. He was at a funeral home in Iowa, And my grandfather, who was Norwegian, told him that funding or investing in a funeral home in a Norwegian community by a Wallace was not going to work. So they up and moved west and landed in a small, dusty town in West Texas. And that's where he stayed for 30 some odd years and passed away there. That's where I was born and raised. So I did not have that extended family situation. No, we would, many times in the summer, we would go back to Iowa and visit grandparents and aunts and uncles and stuff. But I miss that kind of thing, and never had that kind of extensive relationship. It always bothered my sister and me when we would go back to Iowa. My aunts would talk with my mother in Norwegian. And I had no clue what they were saying. And my sister and I always threatened, we're going to go home and learn Spanish, and we'll come back and we'll fix it.
My wife is Chinese. When she gets mad at me, she speaks the language I don't understand. I understand.
My family came through Iowa. My grandmother, my mother's side, was from Iowa. It's funny you mention that. And from New England, Tennessee, Virginia, and so forth. And moved west in the founding of the West, literally. My grandfather was born in Placerville in 1856 and settled down in Elsinore, California, became the water commissioner, as I understand it, and had several sections of land under mining claim, and had a bunch of kids, and that was, unfortunately, state came along and commissioned the land for private land sale, and
Life changed.
kind of decommissioned the family, as it were. And
You know what I find interesting? Both of you were talking about your history, about your parents and grandparents. I wonder how many millennials could do that.
I suppose that's true.
You know,
That's true.
you know your roots, you know where you came from.
Yes.
And that connectivity gave you a sense of purpose. It gave you a mission.
Oh, it did.
It gave you inspiration, and maybe that's one of the things we're missing in our society, that we've been so blessed with abundance, with entitlement, that the ability to earn, become our own people has been lost. My parents never graduated from high school, came out of the Depression, gave me a work ethic, a village,
Yes.
gave me values, opportunities, a scholarship to a great college. It was a sense of community that was very personalized that we don't have now. There was an intimacy, an intellectual intimacy that just allowed us to believe that we could be better than we are today, and I keep trying to find that in young people. That same type of inspiration.
And the parents
It
are
may
working.
be there, but they're not communicating it.
What's interesting is that when we moved out here, my wife and I had two small kids, 5 and 3, moved out here in 1991, and a third child was in the hopper. My wife gave birth to him, and we arrived in April. He was born in July. And shortly thereafter, their grandparents passed away, and they were back east. They were getting up there, and so they really did not spend much time with them. They spent a little bit of time, but not a whole lot. But out here, we met a family through our church, and and eventually we went to work on their ranch up in Springdale in Stevens County, and the kids asked, "Will you be our grandparents?" and they have. And my kids grew up with their grandkids and went to school together, and they still are together. They're in their late 20s and early 30s.
You're talking about a sense of community.
Yes, and my kids
interconnectedness.
initiated that.
Yeah. And I don't hear enough of that today.
Yes.
You know, there's going to be a movie coming out this month, Mr. Rogers.
Yes.
And I was one of those people that grew up with Mr. Rogers. He talked about values.
Yes.
He talked about family. He explained things that I didn't understand. He had a patience. He had It's going to be interesting to see the public response to that. Not only the people in our generation who benefited from that great teacher, but to see the response of the millennials and the young people today about how they respond to this type of messaging that came into our homes every day. And not conflicting, not adversarial, but a caring person who tried to make a difference in our lives. But I think part of his thing was, you can be whatever you want to be. You're a good person, that type of thing. And I'm hoping that that movie kind of shakes the institutions of this country to return to the values that made families strong, that creates a type of respect in government like I saw between Dirksen and Taft, between Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, instead of the horror show I've just watched on television this past week with the where they're ignoring the issues of responsibility and have so politicized things in an adversarial route that it just breaks my heart.
I couldn't agree more.
I hope you'll watch Mr. Rogers. I'm not being paid
I
for
will.
this announcement.
I will.
But he talks about things that we need to demonstrate every day in the media, in politics, in our families, in our homes, in our institutions, the workplace.
It's all, as you mentioned, Mr. Rogers, the one thing that comes to my mind is civility.
Mm-hmm.
He had the capacity to present the idea that everybody has value. And that is my takeaway from it, because what he presented wasn't, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to present to you an opportunity to understand.
You know, it's respecting differences. I'm married to a
Yes.
Chinese woman who is a Buddhist. I'm a Christian. She's a Republican, a Trumper. I'm a Democrat. And people don't understand, how can you two live together? And I said, you know, what we have in common binds us. Our differences are what make us interesting. I did a radio show with Richard Clare, and he was the conservative, I was the liberal. And people would say, how can you be friends with somebody that is so politically opposite? And I said, well, first of all, we have common values. We talk about our differences because we think that makes good radio. Maybe we should talk more about what we have in common. But we gain strength from those arguments. Sure. Either we enforce our arguments or we modify in such a way as to come out with something better than either one of us could have done on our own. And today, it's kind of like, I mean, one of the things that really makes me want to be in this group is that we have political differences. But we can talk, we can enjoy that, and we're not afraid to learn. We're strong enough in our convictions, we're not threatened by differences. But we're not so stubborn in our ideology that we're not willing to learn. And
Well said.
that is just something that I want to see in this country more. That's the legacy I want my children to have.
And after we moved here, I used to listen to you and Richard quite frequently. And in fact, the first political campaign I became involved in was Richard's run for Congress.
Right.
Introduced my kids to him, and they got a kick. They got hats and other election paraphernalia, and that was their first exposure too, and we had a good time.
We had fun with our differences, and I think people enjoyed listening to it. And
but interestingly enough, we're essentially the same generation, but Mr. Rogers is really foreign to me because I lived out in far west Texas. We were late getting television. And then about the time we got it, I graduated, went off to college, was busy in college, didn't have time for television then went overseas for a couple of years, then came back and went to seminary. So there was a several years where I did not even see
you bring up another thing.
television.
You're talking about change, how you adapt, and all the things that went into making your life better. One of the things I just cherish about my college education was they prepared me for change. They said, you're going to have 2 or 3 careers in your life. There's technology that you will need that we can't teach, so education has to be a part of your they said, the university is a smorgasbord. Find out what you're good at and what you like. If you find that, you can have success or fulfillment or happiness. It was empowerment. They taught me communication skills. They taught me how to write for the eye, for the ear. They helped my dialogue, the communication skills. It was an empowerment that allowed me to have a type of personal fulfillment too many people today don't have, or don't have a mission or desire. And I think education is doing a service by focusing on information rather than on empowerment skills that can lead to the type of personal fulfillment, gives confidence so that they can survive in differences, deal with the complexities of society, deal with the global world. Education has failed us. In Spokane, I think their primary thing is buildings. They seem to want to build a school every 20 years rather than improving a curriculum that takes our graduation up to 10% and gets more of them, not necessarily going to college, but pursuing life skills that give them fulfillment.
You just said something I'd like to elaborate on. That just the idea of the 10%. Are you speaking in terms of the number that do not or do?
Of being graduate?
Yeah.
Oh, depending on where part of the country you go to, up to a third of the children basically do not graduate in the 18-year-old timeline. About half of those will make it up sometime in their life in the military, what have you. But I just think education is failing in terms of not developing skills rather than just focusing on data. That just bothers me more than anything else.
The challenge of life is one of feeding yourself and not being a responsibility to anyone else. To take responsibility for yourself and to acquire the skills excuse me, that it takes to be responsible for yourself. I don't see that as any part of the curriculum.
When I was growing up, my values told me I had to go out and work, not only to have a better life, but to help my parents have a better life. And one of the pride of a family, mother and father who didn't graduate from high school, was 3 sons who graduated from college, had successful careers, and bought our parents the first home they ever had and the first new car they ever had. Today I'm seeing too many people in society where the children are growing up saying, well, I'm going to depend on my parents to take care of me until I decide who I want to be. Mm-hmm. Now, that difference of value is less than 2 generations. I'm not saying that all young people are that way. But my wife comes out of a Chinese society where they respect the elderly. They honor the elderly.
Yes.
And too many in our generation are saying, well, this is something we have to put up with. Well, the political reality is a third of our society is going to be seniors, and that reality is something you can't walk away from.
No.
But we used to cherish this. I got pride in giving my parents a home. That to me was a part of what my life mission and values taught me to do. And today, I say, oh my God, I hope I don't have to take care of my folks. That's a value that I guess my family taught me, my church taught me, my institutions taught me, my Boy Scout leader taught me, and I don't know whether that message is coming through as much today.
I guess my kids are really throwbacks. They're in their early 30s, late 20s and early 30s, and yet they share some of those same values because they learned to work. They hated the poverty that we lived in, and I want to make sure that
they're not all that way. And we're talking about
right.
We're talking about trends. But
yes,
the whole point of our discussion upstairs was keeping this country great.
Yes.
Not making it great again, keeping it great, and trying to focus on things that we can do to make sure that our children have the experience that we've had, our grandchildren can have, our great-grandchildren.
I think that it's a worthwhile ambition to try and present something that maybe raises the question as to why what they see today can't predict the same values that our values did.
We're so busy attacking the symptoms of problems rather than the causes. We need to get up at a 30,000-foot level and talk about where we want to be 10, 15 years from now. and set aside a group of resources and people to work on those energies while the rest of us survive to keep this crazy world going. And maybe discussions like this will kind of prompt a greater discussion, a greater debate, bring together people who don't talk enough together to...
Anybody have any ideas here who we'd invite next?
We'll work on it.
I think
We'll work
that's
on
a good idea.
Anyway, thank you guys. Enjoy the opportunity to sit down and chat.
Thank you.
A real privilege.
In listening to you gentlemen in the first part of this program, I've learned a lot about the questions. And I look at the world from a different perspective. I'm a businessman, if you will. And so my attitude really has always been, it's kind of like they used to say, it's the money, and it is about the money. You can't do anything without money. So it's really about economy. And economy from the standpoint of, what was the economy of this country that created the opportunities that we are now building our lives on from our forefathers, and what is that we see today that really can't support that? Because I am very fearful that we don't have a mechanism for, from the perspective of an economist, of a sound dollar and a future in that is predictable. So I would like your gentlemen's opinions of that idea.
My first reaction is the accumulation of wealth, the redistribution of wealth, which really, there were the Rockefellers and there were the Vanderbilts, but I grew up in a society where 80% of the wealth was controlled by 20% of the people. Today I live in a society where about 95% of the wealth is controlled by 1 or 2%. We have it seems like the lower income class or the middle class is diminishing in terms of that wealth. Some countries, like in Japan, control like executive salaries or accumulation of wealth. I think in Japan, an executive can't make in certain companies more than 20 times the salary of the average employee, things of that nature. That is a change that I've seen in my lifetime in 50 years that I think has had an impact. I remember sitting in a meeting with multimillionaires and asking them about the accumulation of wealth. What is it? Why do you have to have hundreds of millions or $1 billion? It can't be because of material need. And after a few drinks, they said, well, you know what? I guess you would say it's keeping up with the Joneses. I'm an executive, and I'm going to make a bigger salary than Corporation X. I'm going to have a bigger home than Joe, and I'm going to have a bigger boat. And one of them is a local millionaire who has a 300-foot boat in Italy that costs more to operate in a year than almost $1 million. And I said, what is that all about? And I said, is that greed? And they said, no, it has to do with issues of self-esteem and our empowerment. And I said, that redistribution of wealth is keeping a lot of capital out of the middle class, out of the working class. And it was that working class that made this country strong. It was that working class that made the greatest generation. And that accumulation, after you have a home and a new car and clothes, what is it all about? That to me is something that bothers me today.
I agree with you, absolutely. I sense that there are those out there that would think that that's a limitation of opportunity. I see the accumulation of wealth as an opportunity, because as you look into society, the best way really is for those that are best capable of raising all boats rather than just their own. And I look at the picture as one where I believe that how he expressed that accumulation of wealth is probably the best example of it, because it's not a spiritual pursuit, it's a physical pursuit. And it's an intellectual pursuit psychologically, but it's not fulfilling. Not at all.
There has been so much consolidation of companies and stuff. As I understand, Spokane used to be a headquarter city for different industries, businesses and industries. But much of that has gone by the way of consolidation, so that companies here have been absorbed in bigger companies, and headquarters have been
Vista
moved.
used to be Washington Water Power.
Right.
U.S. Bank used to be Old National Bank. Umpqua used to be Sterling, local institutions.
Well, not only that, some of the technological companies, Itron, has now been absorbed by I don't know who else, but somebody else, and the headquarters have been moved from Spokane, so that those kinds of opportunities and wealth and philanthropy no longer exist in this community. They've migrated elsewhere.
And that's contributed to some of the issues of poverty
Yeah.
in this country, in this city, where we have, I think 60% of the people who live in the city of Spokane cannot have the income where they take 30% of that net income for housing to afford to buy or rent a home in this city. We're a service industry. We don't have capital intensive businesses. The Keytronics has been diminished by half. The businesses that generated capital, that increase the tax base, are not here. We're a service industry. We pass those dollars back and forth, and we can't even keep up with inflation. The increase in income of 1 or 2% a year doesn't, at best, matches. And welcome Amazon, welcome companies like that, but salaries under $30,000 or $45,000 a year are not going to allow any family of three
That's
to
right.
have a meaningful life.
That is right. The number that I remember when I was young is that the chairman of the board, president of the company's salary couldn't exceed 40 times the janitor. And, it just somehow, it worked. 91% income tax, but that was a mechanism of ensuring reinvestment, and that worked. And that created, I'm not sensing in this group anything more than a common sense representation of what we have seen happen. And I'm not interested in a political perspective on determining solution. I would like moral and ethical values, representation of the ideas of what it is that it takes for us to lift each other, not just oneself. But do that in a manner that is constructive, in that each one of us can enjoy the fruits of the labor that have made it possible to help someone else. And at this table, I'm telling you that we must inculcate in our youth a sense of self-worth, to me, that gives them a sense in society that makes them want to know society, be a part of society, and enjoy the fruits of being a part of society. And I don't see that. It's you so well established that industries that used to find a heart here and a meaningfulness here, that don't now. And that's hurt us.
You talk about motivation and what we have, and I remember talking a couple of weeks ago about a book called The Lonely Crowd, and it was written by Kenneth Kennison. He was a sociologist from Yale. This is in the 50s. And he basically said society in this country is made up of three groups, and 40% of the people are what they call outer directed, 40% are other directed, and only 20% are inner directed.
Interesting.
And the book was a required reading at my university, because their whole focus was to make you inner directed, to find out who you were, what fulfilled you, what gave your life meaning, and have that to be the primary direction that you expressed in your work, your education, and your relationships. 40% of the people who are other directed are people who are so heavily insecure or influenced by outside influences that rather than making courageous decisions, they do what's comfortable. I'm going to eat at the restaurant where people tell me to go, or I'll go to the movie that's most popular, or I'll live in, and they're constantly reaching out of themselves to get instruction about who they should be. Mm-hmm. The most disturbing group was the other direct. And that's where you basically buy the package. You become the hippie. You become the millennial. I'm not going to make personal decisions. I'm just going to buy the uniform. I'm going to be the biker. I'm going to be the thing. I'm not going to make personal decisions about who I am and what I want to be. I'll just buy the package.
Are they the ones on the street these days?
Yep. Beg the issue. And that we need to return to those institutions and things that help us find out who we are and help us become fulfilled. And I go back to that university. Find out what it is you like and what you're good at. If you can put those things together, you'll never work a day in your life. Be prepared for change. My life changed. Family, restricted travel. I'm in my 5th career. And I was never afraid of it. Now, part of it was empowerment from education and knowing how to use the community. But the other part of it was that interdirectedness that was developed. And I think that makes me more responsible, more sympathetic, more empathetic. I think it made me a better employer. I think it made me a better public official. And those are some of the questions I wish education was asking today. I wish families were asking that. This is what I want my children to experience.
In listening to you, Steve, I take that to heart, and all well said. You've had an entirely different experience in your life, and having had an opportunity to work with Dr. King. Mm-hmm. And if you were to give your perspective from that side of things, I would like to know, because we took a lot of the greatest, what I would call spiritually motivated intellect out of this country between 1963 and 68, when we took the leaders out, the Kennedys and Mr. King and others. Mm-hmm. And you saw that. What do you think?
Boy, as I put it in Steve's categories, I think I would have to admit I was partially other-directed, mm-hmm. and partially inner-directed. And growing up, I was disturbed by the inequality and the segregation, because I grew up in segregation. I went to a segregated university, and it was right at the time the sit-in started in the 60s, and I happened to be at some of the student Christian conferences, where that excitement was manifested, was captured and manifested and moved out in the world, and I was a part of that. So I guess in that sense I was kind of inner-directed. And we saw a revolution take place in this country in terms of mentality, in terms of opening doors of opportunity. For example, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 opened up public accommodations in this country. We had lived through the Brown versus Board of Education back in 1953. 54. I can remember the day that decision came down. I was in the kitchen with my mother, and we heard it over the radio, talking about that. Why did there have to be such disparities? Why did there have to be such discrimination? Apparently my dad fought against that as he moved to this small West Texas town, because there was a large Mexican population, a small black population, but the funeral home did not serve either one of them. And he opened that door because it was foreign to his being and his sense of business, or whatever it is. We never really talked about it, but that was wrong to him. And I kind of grew up and captured that in my own life, and which led to my involvement with Dr. King, which was Not something I intended to do as I grew up, but it happened.
In my case, I was raised in a broken family, so I would live part of my life literally camping out in the summer in the family's 22 acres north of Grants Pass, Oregon, where it was rustic, let's say, no cabin. And part of my life was living in town in Grants Pass, Oregon, which was highly segregated. There was one black family, the token community, if you will. And then I lived with my father in South Central Los Angeles. And so the school was half black. And it was interesting to me because they were just people, you know. And as it was, I even had an African-American girlfriend in junior high. And my best friends were the black community. I don't know why, but it seemed like they were the better people at the time.
Friends are friends.
Well, they weren't prejudiced. And so I just kind of learned that I didn't see people like others did. And then I hitchhiked across the country in '57. My brother was in 101st Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and went back there and got a job, and I saw the signs, you know, colored drink water here and colored bathrooms, and I saw that. And as a Caucasian, it didn't have the impact on me that it would have had I been black and gone to that community, because I'd have seen segregation, because all of a sudden I'm the one that's divided out. I wasn't. And so my impression of that was hard for me to fathom, so I didn't think about it, sincerely.
You talk about adversity or problems. And Arnold Toynbee had a theory called the adversity theory, that greatness comes out of adversity.
Yes.
And when you look at the founding of this country, a group of men, majority of them are slave owners, talking about individual freedom. A third of our country basically dealt with racism, and yet we created some of the most democratic institutions in the world. I think sometimes we fail to appreciate that even in environments of adversity, greatness can be inspired. And what really impresses me about this country is that we have overcome the issues of racism or of equality with women voting and things of this nature. It was preserved by founding fathers who knew who we should be, but also realized we weren't there.
Yes.
And they set a mission that said, this is where the country can be, and your job is to build up to it. And we've done that. If sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Steve, you've made a great point, may I? And that's that rather looking back at the fact that it was imperfect, they created the opportunity for us to improve on things that they couldn't at the time.
They told us where we should be. Yeah. That's what, when you read that Constitution that's over 200 years old, they said that's what we should be. And so keep going toward it. And we can't forget that.
Why can't we teach that? Why don't you teach that?
Well, we've taken our little bits of program to try to do it today, and I welcome that opportunity. Thank you all for being a part of today. I appreciate it.
I'm really impressed with the values that I see here. And the opportunity to be in this, for me, is just really rewarding. And
let's do it again.
Yes, indeed.
We'll do it again.
I would like to go, each of us, away from this. I'm thinking, who do we know in our life that can share what I think are the values that we see at this table? I'd like to see other people.
We've got our assignment. Yeah. We'll do it.
This has been Cut to the Chase with Rob Chase, where we cover anything under the sun that would be of interest to you, our viewers. Cut to the Chase has been brought to you by the InlandNorthwestReport.com, alternative news and opinion for the Inland Northwest. Don't forget to catch the Sunday edition of Cut to the Chase, where Rob interviews local pastors on Christian perspectives. Until next time, stay in prayer for God, family, and country.